Hello, welcome back to Mining Network. I'm joined today with Ian Fraser, the CEO and VPX of Fathom Nickel. I was first introduced to this story a couple of weeks ago and since been looking at some of their historic drilling, which seems pretty high grade. Ian, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Look, why don't we just go back to the origins? When did you pick this up? Tell us a little bit about the project, where it sits at the moment, and what the ambition is.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, I'm co-founder of the company. This was formed in 2015 as a private company, and we picked up the well, at the time was the Rottenstone project that we now call that the Albert Lake project. So that was the asset that we used to take the company forward. And then there was a bit of nickel mania around 2020, 2021, and we had the good fortune of going public at that point. And raised a significant amount of money, over $11 million, and went to work immediately on the Albert Lake project. And then in the fall of 2022, we picked up our second project, which is the Gochager Lake project. Both of these in northern Saskatchewan, center to the center. They're about 60 kilometers apart from one another. And we've been, pushing these things forwards. Both of them have had. One was a past producer in the mid 1960s, that being the Rottenstone mine, and the other one has a deposit that was defined in the mid 1960s, and we're demonstrating that really there hasn't been a whole lot of work done on either one of these projects. Uh, Post the production and post the definition of that resource. So we're trying to demonstrate that the province of Saskatchewan, like Manitoba and Quebec, can host these world-class magmatic nickel high-grade sulphide deposits.
Good. All right. Well, look, why don't we ping up some slides because we spoke about this a little bit before we click record, and I think visually it helps with especially with the audience. Nickel can be fairly complicated. So what? Yeah, let's pull some slides up and have a look at the geological setting to begin with.
Okay, well, this particular slide here is demonstrating the province of Saskatchewan, which is the bottom left, province of Manitoba, that's Hudson's Bay, and then the northern part is the Ungava Peninsula of the province of Quebec, and in between the agua colored lines, this is what we refer to as the trans Hudson orogeny. So this was this geologic event that occurred 1.8 billion years ago, and coincidentally, in and around that time, the formation of the Thompson Nickel Belt, which is icon number 2, and the Raglan Nickel Camp, which is icon number 3. And our projects are number 1, the Albert Lake, Gochager Lake, and the Friesen Lake projects. And the message here is, why can't Saskatchewan host similar world-class nickel camps like the Thompson Belt, like the Glencore's Raglan Belt? And the fact is, the rocks are exactly the same. The rocks are exactly the same, and as I mentioned earlier, we've got a little bit of a head start because where there's historic resource, none of them are compliant by today's standards, and one small operating mine, the Rottenstone mine, in production 1965, 1969, low tons, but extremely high grade. So we feel we've got a good leg up on ultimately demonstrating that Saskatchewan is very, very fertile for these types of deposits.
Okay, and you mentioned there you've got a bit of a leg up. Before we go on to that, I know the next slide that you had there was some of the success stories in nickel, and this is something that I've been interested in nickel for quite a few years, and you do see this. So you look at if you go on to the next slide, I think you've got some great examples there. Rio Tinto buying Tamarack, Talon buying Tamarack, Lundin buying Eagle. That was a big announcement a while back. Nova Bollinger was a great transaction. Obviously, the big one is Voisey's Bay, right? The 4 billion transaction that we saw a few decades ago. But nickel being quite an expensive base metal, and it does have this ability, if you can get a high grade nickel sulphide deposit and prove scale, you potentially have the option to sell it for not hundreds of millions, but actually billions of dollars. Look, I think let's move on to it, if you wouldn't mind. Obviously, you've got some mentions here about some of the previous work that was done. Maybe we could have a quick chat about that in terms of what you knew about the assets before you picked them up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Peter. These things, if you demonstrate scale, they're going to be very, very attractive to the major mining companies, and they do have a very good return for shareholders. And there's no secret. This is exactly what we're trying to do: is demonstrate scale, and then liquidate potentially all three assets if we can do our work. But at the Albert Lake project, this small mine, the Rottenstone mine, was in production 1965 through 1969. Only produced 26,000 tons of a resource that was estimated to be 40 to 50,000 tons. But the grades are spectacular: 3% nickel, 1.8% copper, and 9 grams of platinum group elements. And the thesis there is to have that sort of grade. It can't be isolated in a small body. This is the result of a large magma in which the sulphides have been able to scavenge all these metals. So it's got to be a big source. So there has to be other things out there at Rottenstone, and we've demonstrated that. We have made a new discovery, 500. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit further, but we have made a new discovery 500 meters away from the historic Rottenstone mine. Same rocks, same mineralogy. Tenors are slightly lower, but it's proof of concept that this is a very, very healthy system. And there's more of this Rottenstone deposit in the ground. We've done some drilling south of where the mine workings were, and recognized that this deposit's sitting in the hanging wall of a fault. And we feel quite strongly that there should be a footwall offset somewhere, which we haven't been successful thus far in finding that footwall offset. The other deposit, Gochager Lake, this is the one 60 kilometers south of Rottenstone, 4.3 million tons, or actually these are imperial tons, 3.86 million tons at a grade of 0.29% nickel, 0.08% copper. There was cobalt recognized at the time in the mid 1960s, but they didn't credit cobalt with the overall mineral resource calculation. And the work that we've done figuring this deposit out, you can see with our drill hole 23003 and 24016, significant nickel, high grade nickel mineralization over fairly respectable widths. And I have to point out the cobalt, which is boldface there, 0.17, 0.16. This is very, very high grade cobalt. So these are both very, very attractive projects. And to your point, what we need to do is demonstrate scale.
Yeah, why don't we move on to the cross section of Gochager, because this is the project that when I was looking at some of these drill intercepts, I was quite impressed with. Obviously, the first one is an absolute standout. You've got 21 meters there of over 2.26% nickel. That's not even nickel equivalent. That's just the nickel. Tell us a little bit about the structure of the ore body. What are we looking at here? Is it breccias? Is it a conduit system? What's the mineralogy hosted in? I'm assuming it's pentlandite and things like peritite. Just tell us a bit more about what we're actually seeing here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, what we're looking at is a long section here, and so we, as I mentioned, we needed to put this deposit back together again because the historic records are essentially lost. And so what we did was we located the deposit in the field in the first place. We're able to do that with historic drill casings and whatnot, and then we drilled this very first hole, 23003. Which was in close proximity to a hole that was drilled in 1967 that had 290 meters of 0.6% nickel. And there were some high grade intervals within that. So we wanted to get a sense of the mineralogy, the geological controls, And this photograph that you see here, 23003, we got into this beautiful sulphide breccia. It is all pyrite host, but you can see the ghost crystals of pentlandite disseminated throughout the pyrite, and then the copper, the chalcopyrite, is present in stringers and tiny little veinlets, sort of meandering through the pyrite host. The We were talking just before we went on air here. The 21 meters, as we know now, these breccias are aligned in vertically oriented chutes. And the host rock itself, which we call a variable textured gabbro, it has very sharp, albeit difficult to recognize visually, but we know now geochemistry that they're very, very sharp contacts, but they too are vertically aligned. So within this variable textured gabbro, this very, very steeply oriented variable textured gabbro, we have multiple chutes of sulphide breccias, they too being steeply aligned. And our drill hole 23003, the broadness of this intercept is explained by the bit got into one of these chutes. We stayed in one of these chutes for 20 some odd meters, and then exited within this halo of disseminated mineralization that engulfs these high grade sulphide breccias. And I might just point out the other photograph that you see here, 23003. That is a massive sulphide vein occurring within the variable textured gabbro. So we know that there's a broad halo of disseminated sulphides. We know that these sulphide breccias have been remobilized into this broad hosted disseminated mineralization. And that we now recognize that there's also massive sulphide veins that are injecting into the variable textured gabbro. So this tells us that there's yet a source that we have not recognized of what we anticipate to be massive sulphides lurking somewhere within the vicinity of this historic Gochager Lake deposit.
What's the current plan with Gochager? Because obviously like I said, we're looking at some of these drill intercepts here. There's some fantastic nickel grades. You've got some great whips there. Obviously, the historic resource would need to be redone anyway. It was quite low grade in comparison. I'd imagine based on this, would be expecting a bit of, or quite a large uptick in grade. What's left to do before you can try and put a resource around this and really bring it up to modern day?
That's a good question. Understanding the vertical controls now, and historically they were drilling vertical holes. So I think it was misunderstood. 1966, 1967. We know that we were talking earlier. We probe all these drill holes with the borehole EM upon completion, and we've had tremendous success targeting off-hole conductors with the drill bit and intersecting concentrations of sulphide, more sulphide breccias. This dashed line that you see across the long section, that is pretty much where the historical resource was cut off. And our holes 13, 9, and 12, they have intercepts in the table of semi-massive to massive sulphide breccias below the historic resource. So there are more tons in the ground. And this is open along strike to the northeast and to the southwest. To put a number to it, I would think we would, it would be a bit of a crude resource in terms of, maybe not a 43101 compliant, but if we were to focus another 5,000 meters of drilling at the historic Gochager deposit, I think we could demonstrate that this, what was deemed to be 4 million tons, is possibly something closer to 10 million tons. And what that grade is going to be dependent upon how well we define these multiple chutes of semi-massive to massive sulphide breccias. But what's interesting is if I skip ahead to the next one here, Peter, Yeah, and in the top left, you can see in red, this is where we have defined the location of the Gochager Lake deposit. And then the yellow that you see, this is what we call the variable textured gabbro. This is the host rock to this mineralization. And it's not demonstrated on this particular inset here of the geology being projected up to surface, but within that yellow and 500 meters off to the northeast of the historic Gochager Lake deposit, we intersected this variable textured gabbro. We intersected disseminated mineralization. The borehole EM has defined three discrete, strong off-hole anomalies that are now 500 meters away from the historic deposit. And with the surface work and with soil geochemistry, we've expanded the footprint of the original deposit area a minimum 25 times. So we're quite confident that this host variable textured gabbro is going to continue along strike a minimum 1.5 kilometers to the northeast and a minimum 1.5 kilometers to the southwest based on soil geochemistry and limited mapping and prospecting that we did in the summer of 2024. So on this particular slide, I'm using, I mentioned we have the tremendous good fortune of working with Dr. Peter Lightfoot, who spent a good chunk of his career at Vallée studying Inco, then Vallée, studying the Voisey's Bay deposit. And in that image on the top, the Voisey's Bay ovoid, this being the massive sulphide, what Peter has pointed out to us is what's called there a variable textured trochlite. Within that unit, up to 200 meters away from the ovoid, you see semi-massive sulphide breccias. You see massive sulphide veins. The disseminated style of mineralization is in that variable textured trochlite, and it all led to the ovoid essentially. So we feel there's tremendous encouragement now at Gochager to seek this ovoid-like, and this is by no means the next coming of Voisey's Bay. I'm just using this as an exploration model, but we feel that there should be large concentrations of massive sulfides somewhere within this now expanded footprint of the Gochager Lake deposit. So that is what our focus is now, is to try and find a significant body of massive sulfides.
And so how do you go about that over the next year? Do you, and I wouldn't mind talking about your strategy this year. So from what I understand, you've got a drill campaign coming up, potentially in the fall, big one in the winter. Does that focus on the existing area where you've found discoveries, or do you now start looking at doing these step outs along these 1.5 kilometer trends that you've just mentioned there?
To answer that question, there's two parts. If you see the image on the left-hand side, what we've mapped out here is what we're calling this interpreted regional shear. This is what we feel the conduit. This is the mechanism for these magmas to come up and from deep within the mantle and intrude the country rock. And you can see there's a black dot there. That is the location of our 20 to 25 person camp, all season camp. We have crews in there right now, and that that bright red magenta anomaly that you see just to the left, just to the southwest of the camp, this is nickel in soils. And what's very, very intriguing about this was discovered last year. What's intriguing about that is there's 550 meters of strike where 12 plus samples, 50 meters apart, excuse me, are all running greater than the 98th percentile, which was defined to be 162.5 ppm nickel. And we have values right up to 993 ppm nickel. So very, very consistent, very, very anomalous, and associated with the nickel, copper, cobalt, we have chrome and magnesium. So this is telling us that there are mafic ultramafic rocks within the vicinity of the nickel in soil. So that's very, very encouraging. So we're out there right now, we're prospecting, we're going to be mapping this area. And if we come across mineralized variable textured gabbro, that's immediately a drill target. In fact, we're quite comfortable this is a drill target as it is right now. So we're, if you compare this particular anomaly to the right smack in the middle of the image is the Gochager Lake deposit, that being the white dot, you can see that the soil geochem is somewhat muted in and around the historic deposit. So if these anomalies, this anomaly number 2, which is to the north of the camp, and then there's another one here off to the west of Gochager Lake deposit, that being number 3, there was 1,650 ppm nickel in soils at this particular anomaly. So if these things are, if I can use the term, better than the historic Gochager Lake deposit, these two are going to be drill targets. But the second part of the question is, I know, and junior exploration is a tricky business at the best of time. You're always having to appease the market. I'm very, very confident we could go back to the Gochager Lake deposit, drill intercept comparable to some of those intercepts that you saw on the table in the previous slide. And I think that might be good strategy, actually, to go and do that, demonstrate, yes, we're hitting nickel as we pursue some of these other target areas that are hopefully these bodies of massive sulfides.
Okay, all right. So a bit of both. Try and demonstrate scale at Gochager, but then also step out and the much larger land package potential. Just a question on the soil geochemistry. How much overburden, and is there any sort of glacial till or anything like that in Saskatchewan over the license? Because it's sometimes when you see soil chemistry, you're not always sure that it's sourced from directly beneath it, right? If there's been a bit of movement. What's the state of play of the soils there?
Well, first reports from Anomaly Area number 1, that coming, there's people in the field that the overburden coverage was very thin, and there's actually some pretty good outcrop exposure there. But in northern Saskatchewan, typical boreal forest, you'll get these bogs and areas that we don't sample because they're just not. They don't give you a what's the right word, an indicative sense of what's going on subsurface below the bog. But our drill casings thus far, I'd say, from surface to subcrop, we typically are not exceeding 3 meters. So the overburden isn't that thick, and there probably is a small amount of a till development immediately above the outcrop exposure. Yes, and so we're certainly cognizant that has this been transported down ice? What is the distance? Typically, that is the case with soil geochemistry. So that to answer that question, I guess to be determined. But we're very, very confident that we could be drilling this as early as this fall, for instance, number 1. And if we intersect some mineralization in a gabbro, well, then that's telling us that this soil geochemistry is working very, very well, and that we can feel a bit of confidence that these results are somewhat in situ and the source is not too far removed from where we've collected them on surface.
And what about sort of EM work? Any work along those lines planned?
Yes, the dash line or the black lines you see here, we had a line cutting crew in. They went in the 29th of June, I think it was. They came out when the field crew mobilized on Saturday. So they have cut us a 100-meter spaced grid. And the idea there is once we get freeze up, which potentially could, this is the beautiful thing about having an all-season camp. We could be in there as early as, if we have a good early freeze up, late November, we could drop a crew in there by helicopter and run surface EM over this particular grid area, taking advantage of what would now be frozen ponds and swamps, and it just makes the whole survey that much simpler than doing it now, where you'd have to go around the swamps and the ponds. So yeah, that is definitely something that we're going to be doing going forward.
Have you ever done any EM, and has it correlated with the discoveries or the soil geochemistry? How's the relationship between those work?
We have done some EM, yes. To answer that, it's been we've cut a few lines here, and then we've cut a few more lines over here, and we've run um, sort of a pseudo moving loop kind of survey versus a fixed loop survey. So we've tried a few different things, and we did determine that there was a conductive response immediately over top of the historic Gochager Lake deposit. We have picked up some very, very strong anomalies north and northeast, these being EM anomalies north and northeast of the historic Gochager Lake deposit, as well as to the southwest. And if I can just make a comment on overall EM, when we do the borehole EM, very, very consistently, we are detecting responses beyond the end of the drill holes. And you've definitely got a bit of an interest and a bit of a background in magmatic nickel, Peter. But the red herring in these types of deposit settings are the sulfidic iron formations. This whole magmatic nickel system needs to ingest sulfur. There has to be a sulfur source, whether it be in the existing country rock or whether it be coming deep in the mantle. But these sulfidic iron formations give you these tremendous conductors, but when you put a drill bit into them, you find out that they're completely void of nickel, copper, cobalt, and hence you've got to move on. So it's a little bit tricky in that we seem to have a very, very high background, which is potentially the result of some sulfidic iron formation that we know exists in the area. But now we're seeing that soil geochemistry is aligning with, there was an airborne survey, a VTEM survey flown in 2008. So this number one, for instance, is aligning itself with a strong EM conductor, VTEM conductor that we just assumed, based on its very, very linear nature, was a sulfidic iron formation. But if you look at the just the way the soil geochemistry, and these anomalies are open to the east and to the west, obviously, but there seems to be pockets of concentrated geochemistry associated with some of these VTEM conductors. So what is that? And that's another reason for doing EM here come freeze up. And what we'll do is we'll dial the frequency way down. We'll get this down to, if we can run this thing at a 1 hertz, half a hertz. This is going to be an effort to sort of get this background noise out, and maybe we can focus on things that have been kind of blindsided by this overall strong kind of regional conductivity in the area.
And is there any culture in the area in terms of like telephone, power lines or anything like that could have an impact on the survey?
No. We're 20 kilometers from the nearest highway, and there is a transmission line that goes up that highway, but no issues here.
And so how much does this project take the focus and I guess the capital in terms of the company, in terms of the focus of that, rather than Roddenstone? Obviously, like you said, with Roddenstone, it had some really nice PGE elements to it as well, right? So how are you looking at it internally in terms of capital allocation to a project?
Really good question. And Doug and I made this decision about a year ago. We were drilling. We drilled both projects in the winter of 2024. So last January through April, and we just the way the Gochager is set up. We talked earlier. We can expand on that 4 million tons, we feel, quite easily, because the geology is a little less complex in that we've got this expanded footprint, whereas rotten stone, it's structurally a little bit more complex. So as a junior company, exploration company, struggling to make, to raise capital, we made the decision just about a year ago that we would put our immediate focus on Gochager, because we feel there's a quicker path to a potential resource at Gochager than there is at Rottenstone. I've got a history with the Rottenstone project that goes back to 1998, and it is dear to my heart. As geos, we typically fall in love with a project. I'd love to get back there, because you mentioned the grade. I'm not quite sure if this is the next slide. Actually, maybe, yeah. I'll leave this up with just maybe one final point on Gochager, but yeah, the mix of metals at Rottenstone, you've got the PGE component, whereas Gochager, we have had some interesting intersections of platinum, palladium plus gold, but it's kind of sporadic. I mean, and you can't really piece it together. So it remains to be seen if this is going to be part of the overall inventory credit, if you will, at Gochager, the PGEs. But at Rottenstone, the nickel's in the toilet. Platinum, palladium prices are going up. There's gold associated with the platinum, palladium, so it's almost this built-in hedge. This precious metal component at Rottenstone is very, very attractive. And ultimately, if there's a mine there, you're taking it all out. But in terms of the market, I mean, we've seen this before, where nickel prices are depressed, but the PGE prices are going up. And since May of this year, the PGE prices have really started to take off again. So yeah, I'd love to be exploring on both concurrently, but that requires a lot of capital, and that's been a challenge of late. Just one final comment, if I may, Peter, on Gochager. What we're looking at here is 10 kilometers away from the Gochager Lake deposit to the immediate southeast. There's what's called the Maul Lake nickel occurrence. And here too, this was drilled in 1967. There's been zero work done here since 1967. They were getting drill intercepts of, what do we got here? The top part of the chart. 4 meters of 1.58% nickel, 0.3 copper, 3 meters of 1.17 nickel, 0.36 copper. So you immediately recognize that the nickel copper ratio is similar at Maul Lake as it is at the Gochager Lake deposit. And of course, here again, they weren't analyzing for cobalt. And fortunately, some of this drill core is available for perusal in the Larange Precambrian core library. So we went up there with the PXRF and demonstrated that there are cobalt credits associated with the nickel copper mineralization. And just, proxy here, PXRF is not an assay, it's just an indicator, but very, very encouraging that the PXRF was picking up the cobalt. And we visually recognize that this too is hosted in what we call a variable textured gabbro, and not a quartz diorite as it was logged in the past. So all indications are that the mineralogy at Maul Lake, 10 kilometers away from Gochager Lake, is the same, which would talk to a common source. So this kind of opens up the blue sky potential for the entire property as a whole. So it's not just Gochager, it's not just the expanded footprint at Gochager. Something has to explain this similar mineralization 10 kilometers away. So it really is a very, very prospective property.
Okay, one of the other slides that I quite going back onto, I know we're doing a bit of flipping around the projects here, but going back to Ronstone, you had the next slide, which was quite interesting, looking at the previous production. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we did talk about the grade, and then the image that you see, that this is the mining operation circa 1965. So you can see that there's a bit of a goss in there, and what they've done is they've made their initial cut right through the Gosselin. So this was the hill of rotten stone that dates back to 1928, 1929. You know, what's current day Teck here in North America at that time was called Consolidated Mining and Smelting Company of Canada Limited. So they drilled the very first holes here at Rottenstone in 1929. They recognized that, oh, wow, there's some pretty significant grade in here. So fast forward, we talked about the small mining operation. Fast forward to Fathom Nickel, did our financing. We went out there, proof of concept that Rottenstone does not occur all by itself. Our hole 220052, which is the middle core photo, is located at what we call the Bay Island Trend, which is 500 meters away west northwest of the historic Rottenstone mine. So here we got into the same rock type, this beautiful net textured sulphide hosted in a essentially a peridotite Harzburgite. Got quite excited when we opened up that particular core box and saw this beautiful net textured sulphide. But I remember cautioning a colleague of mine and said, well, I mean, it looks exactly the same as, Met sample 772134, which actually came out of the ore dump at Rottenstone. But let's wait on the assays. And we did get the assays. Hole number 52 returned, what am I saying here? The high grade section was, we got, 1.09% nickel over 3.5 meters. So there's roughly a third metal tenor at the Bay Island Trend compared to the Rottenstone deposit. But again, proof of concept that this is a big system. Rottenstone is not all by itself. And a hole that we drilled in, I'll just wrap it up here, Peter, a hole that we drilled in 2024, this hole number 77, we got into Rottenstone-like host rock, this being this, peroxenite, peridotite rock. There was very little sulfide in there, but there was sufficient sulfide in there that we could calculate nickel tenors, and very, very encouraged that the nickel tenor at 77 was comparable to the nickel tenors that we recognize from mineralization at the historic Rottenstone deposit. So what that tells us is this ultramafic rock that we intersected in 77 is part of another ultramafic body that, with sufficient sulfur in it, potentially yields the same type of grades that came from Rottenstone. So you can see 77 is located roughly 1.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers to the west southwest of historic Rottenstone, again in a very, very attractive soil geochemical anomaly. So this, when we get back there, this would be our focus of exploration, is what is causing this, where is the source of this intercept that we had very near surface, actually, in hole number 77, which is encouraging with respect to the soil geochemistry, is there is ultramafic subsurface. So there again, that's telling us that the soil geochemistry is giving us a pretty good lead here in our exploration.
Yeah, just on Rottenstone, you mentioned at the beginning there, I think it was about 26,000 tons that was mined from the project, obviously quite high grade. What was there, is there more to be found within the deposit itself? Why did that mine close, or was it just tapped out? I guess looking at that map that we're seeing here with the soil geochemistry, you've got a great target there. What's the potential scale of this thing, or is it too early to say?
I think it's too early to say. To answer, you can see where in the photograph you can see where the mill is relative to the Rottenstone outcrop. So the historic drilling suggested that this thing plunged off to the east towards the mill. And we know now, I don't have a picture here, but the pit stopped right along what would be the, sort of the left wall of this makeshift mill. So the mill got in the way. And the drilling that we have done, which is essentially right out the front door of the mill, this is their makeshift tailings pond. We've drilled a couple of holes, this hole number 2024 or 21024, demonstrating that there is more of this rottenstone like mineralization south of the historic workings. And they didn't recognize that. They didn't drill holes from the ice back towards the deposit. They just assumed that it pinched off to the east, essentially where the mill is. But it appears to be running more in a north-south direction. And the work that we have done is we know that it's butts right up against this this fault that's indicated in the diagram here. So the deposit is sitting in the hanging wall of the fault, and we think it's a reverse type fault, and the footwall offset is probably out in the bay at depth, or possibly maybe the footwall offset is what we're seeing down around hole number 77. We can't rule out that. So instead of it being more of a reverse fault, it might be more of a thrust fault, and there could be, significant displacement along this fault. So, I think part of the challenge, we were talking about this earlier, is these are sort of lensoid type pods that were probably all part of something very large and very significant 1.8 billion years ago that has since been moved around due to subsequent faulting and folding and whatnot. So it's kind of a string of pearls analogy has been used to. But here too, ultimately, there's got to be a source to this thing. Where's the feeder? The grades are incredibly intriguing indeed.
Yeah, now I understand actually why you think Rolling Stone's a bit more complex, and perhaps Gochager is a bit easier to go after. But why don't we just finish up just talking about what the next 12 months can look like? What's the plan over the summer? What are we looking like into sort of this time next year?
Well, our field crews will have wrapped up the exploration program at Gochager sort of mid-August at the latest. Doug and I are in the process of, the best case scenario here for us, Peter, is we're quite confident that this field program that we're doing at Gochager is going to add to our ever building basket of drill targets at Gochager. We're market cap issues, share price issues right now. We'd like to think that we can potentially get this moved up to a point where we'll be doing another financing here towards the end of the summer, which would finance let's call it a small drill program in the fall at Gochager. So maybe we would do 5 to 6 holes. I would have to move the drill in by helicopter to do this. Again, the luxury of the camp, we could probably push the limit in terms of how far we go before the weather gets really, really nasty, and have everybody out of there, well before Christmas. And hopefully, with good drill targets and potentially some good drill results in September, October, that would spur on, that would be the initiative to do another significant raise, because we'd like to, we're very, very confident at Gochager, and what this needs now is, thus far we've been doing 3,000 meter to 5,000 meter drill programs. We need to go at this thing aggressively now. We feel that we're smart enough now that we can justify a minimum 5,000 meter program, but potentially 10 to 15,000 meter drill program. And we will have the luxury at Gochager of being to use historic winter trails and ice roads to get fuel into the camp, meaning we won't need the helicopter come wintertime. This is going to have a tremendous impact on our overall exploration costs. So ideally, we're drilling January, February, March. into April at the Gochager Lake deposit. Um, at which point we're demonstrating, yeah, we can expand on Gochager. Yes, we have found massive sulphides. And yes, this is developing into a cluster of magmatic nickel sulfide deposits at the Gochager Lake project. And within this regional conduit that we were feeling quite comfortable calling that now. But all the while, 10 kilometers to the southeast, there's this other very, very intriguing nickel target as well.
And just because you did mention potential financings there, what's the current register looking like in terms of shareholders? I think in the preso it mentions that you have around 20% institutional. That's quite a big number for a company of your size. So just interested in what the background is around that.
Yeah, our largest shareholder has been Crescat Capital out of Denver, and Dr. Quentin Heine is um, PhD geologist with Crescat Capital, and they've been tremendous. They got in on the IPO. I've got a meeting forthcoming with Quentin. They supported us in the last financing to the point where they have about 17 to 18% of shares outstanding, and have indicated they'd like to keep that position going forward. Management, we always want more. We'd like to have a little bit more skin in the game, but we're sitting around, I'm going to say, bring in directors and whatnot, and very, very close associates. That's probably about 10% of the float currently, and the rest would be retail.
All right, so good. You've got a sort of foundational cornerstone backer that has your support. So that's always a good place to start from. Ian, really appreciate your time and thanks for updating us on the story.